This is a true story. In some cases, actors speak the documented words of soldiers and resistance fighters. There is no fiction. Michael Gutowski is a Canadian now, a founder of the Canadian Olympic equestrian team. At the start of the Second World War, he fought as a Polish cavalry officer. At the end, he led a Polish regiment under command of the Canadian Army.
Well, Michael.
Hello, hello.
Today he's sharing some memories with other veterans who fought for Poland and Canada. Memories of Christmas, 1944.
You know what I did? I went hunting with a rifle with a friend of mine along the Mosa, shooting rabbits.
And did you get
and the
any?
Germans noticed us on the other side, put the artillery fire on us, on two of us. And it was quite funny because we didn't shoot any rabbits, but the Germans nearly shot us, you know.
Where were you at Christmas
Well,
1944?
I was in the land estate of my uncle, very near Warsaw.
Irena
where I
Bellert is a
spent
linguistics
some time
professor at
during the
McGill
insurrection of
University.
Warsaw. But it was a very sad period in my life because my husband was killed by Germans. He was in the home army, and I gave birth to my son.
In 1944, Irena Bellert fought the German occupiers as a member of the Polish underground. Canadian Captain Pierre Sevigny would win Poland's highest military decoration. He spent the Christmas of 1944 on the front lines.
There was a truce that was called there, you know, between the infantry soldiers. And at night, I remember that particular night, from the German lines came the sounds of that beautiful song, Holy Night, Silent Night, Holy Night. And frankly, it was impossible to believe that men were stupid enough to be killing each other. And then at 8 o'clock the next day, the guns started firing all over again, and we knew we were at war again. Thank God there was rum. Otherwise, it would have been desperately sad.
Through the eyes of these Canadians, this is a story of battles that brought together a Polish cavalry officer, a Canadian captain, a Polish underground member, and tens of thousands like them. Together, they wrote a chapter in the history of Poland and of Canada. Through the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime built up its military power and crushed all resistance. The 1936 Olympics in Berlin were turned into a Nazi spectacle. The German army even marched in the opening ceremony. The Nazi anti-Jewish racial policies were already well known. But much of the world was naive about Hitler's intentions. Remarkably, the Canadian Olympic team even gave the Nazi salute. Michael Gutowski was also in Berlin with the Polish equestrian team. He won a silver medal and remembers that his first hint that war was approaching came from a German general.
The German general gave a special dinner in which was only Polish team, German team, and few officials, including a few Nazi in the brown uniforms. He get up, and of course in German, there's a toast for the Polish army, which I believe very soon will go arm to arms with us against the mutual enemy. Well, that was very clear. He meant Russia.
But that's not the way it worked out. In 1939, the Germans stunned the world by signing a treaty with the Soviet Union. These former enemies agreed not to attack each other, the two dictatorships also secretly made a deal to carve up Poland.
Owszem, w jakim to wieku? 4.
When he travels back to Poland now, Michael Gutowski is asked to pass along his skills to up-and-coming members of the Polish Olympic team. At the age of 84, he still shows the determination and courage that took him off to war on that first day of September in 1939. The opening shots of the Second World War came in the German surprise attack on Polish military installations in the port of Danzig, followed quickly with the onslaught of German Stukas and Panzers. Poland was hopelessly unprepared. Her army still depended on massed cavalry units. No match for the German armored divisions racing towards Warsaw.
The commanding of the army ordered the cavalry brigade to stop them. Doesn't matter how, sacrifice anything, but you stop them.
There were isolated incidents of Polish cavalry engaging German tanks. But Nazi propaganda films blew them out of proportion with elaborate reenactments to mock the Poles. Hitler's targets were not just military. The type of war shaping up was apparent to one of Poland's leading generals, Władysław Anders.
I saw a group of small children being led by their teacher to the shelter of a woods. Suddenly, there was the roar of an airplane. As he dropped his bombs and fired his machine guns, the children scattered like sparrows. The airplane disappeared as quickly as it had come. But on the field, the crumpled and lifeless bundles of bright clothing remained. The nature of the new war was already clear.
On September 17, 1939, another knife in the back for Poland. The Soviet army attacked from the east. Swiftly, the Soviet and German armies conquered Poland and then divided it up. The Nazis turned what was left of the country into a kind of huge concentration camp. Warsaw, the capital, became a Nazi trophy. In Warsaw, one of the most striking Second World War monuments celebrates the valor of children who wore pilfered German helmets to fight the Nazis. A huge work marks the resistance of an underground army, the men and women of the AK. Many AK veterans have come back to Warsaw for this reunion. Canadian Irena Bellert was recruited early in the war.
A friend of mine approached me and my sister and asked whether we want to join the underground organization. We were supposed to carry secret press from one place to another, and also to do some other services.
Printing and distributing secret bulletins was a crime punishable by death. The AK was a true underground, at critical moments using the sewer system under Warsaw for passage.
Just like that.
Went this way, no?
Yes.
Irena Bellert and another Canadian, Myszka, remember the experience well.
We bent going like this for 3 hours, and the walls were very slippery.
Yes.
Walls were very slippery. You can't support yourself anyhow.
Myszka was only 19 when the Germans began a reign of terror.
Germans arrested people almost right away. One night they arrested all intelligentsia, doctors, lawyers, professional people. The next day, everybody was very terrified what's going on, who will be next. Everybody was at that point very... We were afraid of them at the beginning.
The Germans intended to systematically eliminate any kind of leadership for the Polish nation, Christian or Jew. Thousands were executed. Hundreds of thousands of Poles were deported to Germany for slave labor in the Nazi war industries. Most were never seen again. From the part of Poland conquered by the Soviets, more deportations. Over 1 million were sent as far as Siberia, including 180,000 Polish soldiers. Their fate in the Gulag was recorded by a Polish artist on the only material he possessed, cigarette papers. Sharing the grim conditions with his men was General Anders, who was beaten and left to freeze.
It was 30 below zero. After 6 weeks in the cell, an examining magistrate appeared. I was asked to join the Red Army. I refused.
Thousands of Polish soldiers were spared the fate of Anders and his men. They avoided capture, escaping through Europe and eventually reaching Scotland. They fell in with the armed forces of many nations gathering in Great Britain and were issued British uniforms.
Fighter pilots, among whom were Poles and Canadians, were honored by the visit of His Majesty. Men who are
Poles and Canadians first fought together in the Battle of Britain. Then, during training in Scotland, when the Polish ground forces were short of artillery, the Canadian Army was asked to send over a regiment of guns. A French-Canadian unit was chosen. Pierre Sevigny was a captain.
In Poland in pre-war years, the second language of Poland was French. And most of the senior officers of these two divisions were French-speaking and could not speak English that well. So when they learned that there was an artillery unit that was French-speaking, well, they said, they're the unit for us. These fellows were quite different from anything we had ever met. There wasn't a single Polish soldier or officer who did not have a tragedy in his life. Either, for instance, they had lost their families, or they had lost their loved ones, or they had learned about what the Germans were doing in Poland, and what they were doing was not exactly very gentle. And what they wanted was revenge.
Before the Polish army would have any chance for revenge, the German authorities in Warsaw would drastically escalate their repression. Among the targets would be Jews and the women of the Polish underground. For Poles, almost every street corner in Warsaw carries powerful memories of the German occupation. Filmed during the war with a hidden camera, this is a random German roundup of Poles, part of a relentless terror campaign. Streetcars would be stopped. For no reason, people would be arrested and trucked off to incarceration. Many were brought to a notorious prison in the center of Warsaw, Pawiak. Some prisoners were hanged or shot in the courtyard. Irena Bellert remembers every detail of the night she was brought in.
I was hard asleep, at night. And all of a sudden my mother came to me, said, "You have to get up because two officers German officers, Gestapo, came to take you. That's all.
What did she say to you before you left?
Well, we parted, kissed each other, and she said, God will save you, I'm sure, I will pray for you, you know, all those things. On the same night we met with all the girls who were also arrested, so that we had enough time to say that we are not going to admit that we did anything, that we were in the underground. So that was our luck.
Arrested about the same time was Irena Bellert's first cousin, Krystyna Wituszka. She smuggled letters out.
Dearest Mommy, don't cry. I am well and in good spirits. Daddy, take care of Mommy. She is alone now. Oh, please send me my red dress, toothpaste, and some washing powder.
Krystyna spoke German and had been assigned by the Polish underground to obtain information from the occupying forces.
We went to some cafe and talked to Germans. She was very young and very pretty, and she could do this. They treated her as a very important person.
This is the Moabit High Security Penitentiary in Berlin. In 1942, when Krystyna Wituszka was moved here, it was reserved for high-caliber prisoners, like those accused of spying against the Reich.
It's lonely here, and I have a hard time getting used to it. I miss my friends. Through my window, I can see the tops of 2 trees and a bit of sky. And in the corner of my cell, there is my spider. He is my companion.
The imprisoned women were determined to hold their heads high.
This was a question of having pride, not to show to Germans that we are humiliated. We wanted to show that we don't care. This was the attitude of most prisoners.
In June 1941, stunning news. Hitler broke his non-aggression pact and attacked the Soviet Union. The Red Army was in full retreat. Stalin was panicking. Now he needed help from remnants of the Polish army in his prison camps. The Soviet secret police took General Anders directly from his jail cell to the Kremlin in Moscow, the man of the hour.
After 20 months in prison, 7 in solitary confinement, I had recovered my freedom by a miracle.
The leader of the Polish government in exile, General Sikorski, arrived in Moscow to make a deal with Stalin. Some Poles would fight the Germans under Soviet command, while an entire division would be allowed out of the Gulag to fight under General Anders on the Western Front. In Poland, the underground army began attacking German troop transports headed east. Reprisals were ruthless. Resistance members were methodically hunted down and taken to Gestapo headquarters in Warsaw.
One of our colleagues was arrested. She was beaten and tortured, and she gave our names because she was sure that they also know all of us. Therefore, when we met in prison, she was terribly upset when she found out that no one admitted anything. No one of these girls admitted anything. I was confronted with her during the investigation, just in a room like this one. She came, and the Gestapo officer, asked me and asked her, and she confirmed that she lied to the Gestapo. The officer said, well, are you aware that you will be very severely punished because of that? She said, I am aware, but I cannot live with this feeling that so many young girls who are innocent are in prison because of me. And they let us go, all of us, after 9 months, except for 2 boys who went to Auschwitz, and she was sentenced to death, this courageous girl. Her name was Kęszycka, Józefa Kęszycka.
Meanwhile in Berlin, Irena's cousin Krystyna Wituska was also feeling the force of Nazi terror. Her cellmate, a German dissident named Mimi Turville, had just been taken away for execution.
She was so splendid, a lawyer and musical. They could not break her. Mimi and I often discussed suicide. She said she could not wait patiently like a sheep until they decided when they should kill us. For a long time we considered this, but finally decided that we must leave them the moral responsibility for our murder.
In downtown Warsaw, in the Umschlagplatz, a busy gas station masks a piece of evidence of a crime committed during the Second World War. Mass murder. This is one of the last remaining sections of the Warsaw Ghetto Wall. In 1940, the wall was erected to imprison the 350,000 Jews who lived in Warsaw, a number in one city equaling all the Jews of France. The Warsaw Jews were being systematically starved to death by the German occupiers. To help them was a crime punishable by death. Over 1,000 non-Jewish Poles died trying, but most did nothing.
Many people were walking just as usual, you know, and probably they have this feeling of guilt for the indifference, but it's also, I say that also very much psychological reasons enter here, that people are scared themselves because, of course, Germans didn't spare Poles as well. So they don't want to be scared all the time, and they try to think about other things.
In April 1943, the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto began. A small group of young Jews decided not to go without a fight. The Germans were startled at the resistance and beat a retreat on the first day. But soon the SS mobilized their forces to crush the uprising. The Jews held out for over a month, but were finally annihilated. The horrific truth about their fate traveled through the Polish underground.
They transported the Jews to camps and gassed them. If you pass these camps on the train, you can smell the burning bodies. People close the window and hold their noses. It's no fairy tale.
In all, 3 million Polish Jews would be exterminated, 90% of the pre-war Jewish population of the country. By early 1944, Polish forces had become the 4th largest armed contingent on the Allied side. The underground army was fighting in Poland. Several divisions were under Soviet command on the Eastern Front. Polish units were in the British Navy and Air Force, and General Anders' Polish Corps was heading into its first action in the Allied push up through Italy. Here too they joined Canadians under the command of the British 8th Army. Their mission? Capture the German-held stronghold of Monte Cassino which two armies had already failed to take. The battle started with a massive artillery barrage. And then the Polish infantry attacked up the exposed mountainside.
On the morning of May 18th, the white and red flag of Poland was hoisted over the ruins of Monte Cassino monastery by a patrol of the 12th Lancers. The fortress that had for so long blocked the road to Rome had fallen.
The Poles suffered almost 4,000 casualties. They thought they had taken a major step towards the liberation of their homeland. But for many of their compatriots, it would be too late. In Germany, Krystyna Wituska was found guilty of espionage against the Third Reich. The sentence? Death.
Beloved parents, how hard it is to write this last letter. I am not afraid of death. I do not regret my life. I only think about how much sorrow it will give you, how you will grieve in the last hours of my life. Mommy, may God ease your pain. I can never thank you again for my joyful and carefree childhood. I am looking for words to cheer you, but I can only think of one sentence, and Wanda said, God's best loved die young. I am completely at peace. My last obligation to you and Poland is to die bravely. Dearest Mommy, dearest Daddy, I dedicate my last thoughts to you. Be brave. Bid me farewell. Krystyna.
On June 26, 1944, Krystyna Wituska was executed by guillotine. In France, in Normandy, even decades later, there are still signs of one of the key battles of the Second World War. When Michael Gutowski comes to find his old battlefield, his cavalry officer's heart skips a beat. When he was here in August of 1944, Colonel Gutowski was in the Polish Armored Division, fighting under Canadian command. The first shots of his battle here came during a casual conversation across a hedge with a fellow Polish officer, a close friend.
The bullets went all around us, you know, and the Maciejowski disappeared from my eyes. So I call him Maciej. Maciej is a Polish nickname for Matthew. So I call him Matthew. Where are you? What's happened to you? So I went over the hedge, and he's on the face, down on the ground. Well, his fate. He got that bullet, and he was stone dead.
The German army was described as the most powerful and ruthless force ever assembled in a dark cause. But in August 1944, the main body of Nazi troops in Normandy was being surrounded and cut off. The stage was set for the most momentous battle of the Western Front. Assigned to block the German escape route was the Canadian Corps, under the command of General Guy Simonds. The object was to encircle the Germans near the town of Falaise. Simonds deployed the Polish Armored Division under General Monte to help close the gap. Poles like Michael Gutowski would fight side by side with Canadians like artillery officer Pierre Sevigny.
I was ordered to go report to the headquarters of General Matchik. And when we reached the plateau, we reported that the coast was clear, that no sooner were we there with infantry troops and the armor that the Germans realized we were blocking the road. Yeah, and then the fun started. And did it ever start?
The Germans may have been almost surrounded, but their troops were still well equipped and battle-hardened. They fought ferociously to escape the trap. Michael Gutowski's tanks were being picked off one at a time by the far superior German Tiger tanks. His troops were taking heavy casualties from German artillery.
It was heavy under artillery fire here. We got the artillery support from our Canadian artillery here.
That's right, it was my guns.
Very likely, yes. We are quite happy to have it.
The Canadian artillery weighed in. The battle went on so long that the Poles were running out of ammunition. Their situation was desperate.
We were pretty convinced that if the Germans attacked once more, it was the end.
Some tanks were approaching in the distance. They looked like Allied tanks.
The Germans were everywhere. We got through them, and eventually we reached these tanks. And looked at us, and one of them started firing. Thank God he missed. And then we found a way to identify ourselves. That meant the end had come. The link between the encirclement was over.
The encirclement of much of the German Army of the West marked the end of the Normandy battle. At that moment, in August 1944, 1,500 kilometers away on the Eastern Front, a second key battle was beginning for the Poles. The advancing Soviet army reached the Vistula River across from Nazi-occupied Warsaw. In Warsaw, the bulletin spread the word. The Polish people, led by the underground Home Army, were to rise against the Nazi oppressors. They were confident that Stalin's army across the Vistula would come to their aid. The politics could be sorted out later. Among the women of the Warsaw Underground was Irena Bellert.
I married my fiancé. He was in the Home Army. And I was pregnant with my son when the Warsaw uprising happened. And my husband took part in the uprising. You can imagine, it was not easy to part. I was in the 9th month of pregnancy, 9 months of pregnancy. And I was scared that he would be killed. So he was. We were very much in love, and I was very young, and I gave birth to a son, and he wanted very much to have a son because the first one was a daughter. So it was, of course, a tragic situation.
At the beginning of the uprising, the German occupiers were caught by surprise. it appeared the ragtag Home Army, in captured German helmets, would be successful. But once again, energy, determination, and valor were pitted against a German war machine that was far from defeated. The Poles didn't have a chance. Hitler ordered the razing of Warsaw. The Soviet forces merely waited across the river and let the Nazis do their dirty work. Stalin was content to see the Polish underground eliminated, so he wouldn't have to deal with them. 20,000 Polish resistance fighters were killed, along with 200,000 civilians. Close to 1 million others were sent to concentration camps. "1,800 women from the Polish underground were shipped off to a prison camp in Germany near the Dutch border. It was called Oberlangen. When the women arrived, they were told to undress and go to the showers. Mira Swinarska was there.
We didn't know what's going on. We will be gassed or just, it was a shower, but it was a shower, fortunately, and we are very happy. But it was very dramatic moment in my life, probably with everybody's life.
While the women awaited their fate in Oberlangen, in Normandy, the Polish and Canadian soldiers walked through the aftermath of the terrible battle that turned the tide on the Western Front.
Think of thousands, but thousands of dead men, dead animals, and something that was possibly the worst is the smell. Because this was in August, you know, and the weather had been particularly hot. And the stench of the battle, well, as I'm telling you now, I still have it in my nose. I still can feel it.
40,000 German soldiers were captured in the battle. The Poles had a reputation of dealing harshly with surrendering Germans, especially the dreaded Nazi SS.
I always felt respect to the army men, but SS, which have had a really dirty reputation, we fought no quarters, I mean no prisoners.
After the Normandy battle, the Poles and Canadians would fight on together, sweeping north through Holland towards Germany. For the Poles, this was the path to Warsaw. In the German city of Papenburg, just across the border from Holland, the local high school is sponsoring a mural contest depicting the town's past. There's lots about butterflies and boat building. The sign says, "Hey, stop and see our history." There are no pictures of the dark history contained behind the walls of this documentation center. The story of a local concentration camp, Oberlangen, where the women of the Polish underground were imprisoned. There's almost no trace left in the field where the camp stood, but the inmates have vivid memories of what it was like. They especially recall that day in May 1945 when they heard armor approaching at high speed. Was it death or liberation? Was the tank American, German, or Canadian? Misha Nowicka remembers hysteria.
Commandant said, girls, go inside, go under the table, sit there, don't go out. And all girls were out. We have seen the soldiers, and one friend, which was very good, educated. She knows 5 languages. She said, "Do you speak English? Do you speak French? Do you speak German?" He said, "I am Polish. I am from the Polish army," he shouted. And we start to laughing, kissing, enjoying. Really, really wonderful.
What was an amazing thing, there was a first camp which we liberated, and there was girls from Warsaw uprising. That was amazing. It was hard to believe.
We are liberated by Polish soldiers. It was nobody believed. We can't believe it. Even for 2 days, we don't sleep. We're just singing, jumping, and hugging each other. Whoever come to our camp, I mean soldiers, we hug them. We don't know them, but we hug them. You liberate us. We are free. This was the best moment in our life.
In Haaren, Germany, under Canadian supervision, Polish army women run their own camp with military precision. On the parade square, the Amazons are a credit to their uniform.
In its propaganda films, the Canadian government was quick to take credit for liberating the camp.
Soon the women warriors will be returning to build new homes out of the ashes of heroic Poland.
But behind the scenes, the Western Allies were preparing to abandon heroic Poland. In Yalta, the Allied leaders agreed that Poland should fall into the Soviet orbit. This in spite of revelations that Stalin had ordered the execution of 20,000 Polish soldiers in 1940. The Poles would be denied the freedom they had so valiantly fought for.
We Poles were used to the Russians. But the changed attitude of the British and American leaders distressed us. We Poles were numbed and bewildered. There was a violent reaction in the army as the men realized the great injustice that had been done.
Today is Victory in Europe's day. Long live the cause of freedom. God save the King.
There was to be no freedom for Poland, for whom the war started. The Poles were not even invited to participate in the victory celebrations in London for fear of giving offense to the Soviets.
Now they celebrate together the great day of triumph.
At war's end, after all the Polish and Canadian soldiers had been through together, the Canadian government actively discouraged immigration by European refugees, including Poles, especially Polish Jews. Finally, Canada let in 4,000 Polish soldiers as indentured laborers to replace German prisoners of war working on Canadian farms. It would be years until the immigration restrictions would be lifted. In Poland, at the end of the war, Irena Bellert had to stay in Warsaw and deal with the communists. Even though she was only at a low level in the resistance, she did not fare well. The Stalinist regime locked her up for 7 years, for months at a time, in solitary. She was not allowed any contact with her children. After she was released in 1955, she eventually came to Canada to stay. During the 50th anniversary commemorations of the Battle of Normandy, the Poles hoped that the official Canadian delegation would stop at the Polish cemetery. At the last minute, the buses passed by, and a disappointed Colonel Gutowski addressed his fellow veterans.
I said, I don't know if you know something about it. We, Poles, fighting as a Poles for our freedom, we at the same time were fighting for the glory of Canada. You know, there are many times where reports were coming from the front line, and Canadian forces took this place or another. I assure you, then sometimes was not a single Canadian there. But that is okay. And I have to tell you another thing. then you Canadians don't realize, then you were fighting for freedom of Poland. Because one way to make a Poland free is to defeat Germans. And for this, in the name of these 1100 on that cemetery, in the name of myself and this which survive, I thank you for.
And these are words that should be repeated more often. They are beautiful and very true words.
In 1945, Captain Sevigny was honored by Poland with the Virtuti Militari, its highest military honor. He lost a leg in one of the last battles of the war. Today in Warsaw, in the former Royal Palace, women who took part in the Warsaw Uprising are honored with a pageant. Many were no older than these girls when they fought for the freedom of Poland. Colonel Gutowski, whose regiment liberated them from Oberlangen, is given a place of honor. Many of the women of Oberlangen fell in love with their Polish liberators. There were 300 marriages as a result, and many of those couples are here too. Hundreds of these Polish veterans were finally able to settle in Canada, and their story became Canadian history. The terrible experience of the war turned many into Polish nationalists, but some turned away from nationalism as one of the causes of war. At the University Library in Warsaw, Irena Bellert discovers one of her cousin Krystyna Wiatuska's final letters.
I wouldn't want to exploit the idea that I am a patriot who died for her country. I did not become a nationalist here, quite the contrary. I consider nationalism to be a serious limitation on the individual, and so I am first a human being, and only then a Pole. On the day I will die, I will say it is for freedom and justice, and not for Poland.
Terribly sad.
Many Polish soldiers, sailors, and airmen developed a strong attachment to the Canadians who fought and died with them in the Second World War. In the decades after the war, when they could not return to their old country, thousands came to Canada to help build a new one.